Mark Watts from Exaro. I want to turn to, could you both address this question, if possible, please? I want to turn to the whistleblowing policy. This was one of the elements that was taken away from the remit of Dame Janet Smith's report, I think by Lord Hall. You commissioned a separate report produced by a company by the name of GoodCorporation, which gave you pretty much, gave the BBC pretty much a clean bill of health on its whistleblowing policy as it stands now, bar some criticism over lack of awareness amongst people working at the BBC. This is in sharp contrast to what we read at par 88 of Dame Janet Smith's report, where she says that she was particularly disturbed by the evidence about the extent to which staff were, and still are, afraid to raise complaints or concerns for fear of losing their jobs or the opportunity for promotion, or for freelancers, the fear of not being used again. Which of those two reports do you believe?
I don't answer the question, which do you believe? Let me just wind back. You asked, I think it was from you, asked Dame Janet about the changes in her in her terms of reference.
That was a Telegraph over there.
It was a Telegraph, oh, I'm sorry. Anyway, there we are. Well done, Telegraph. Look, I came in some crisis in this organisation in 2013. I met Dame Janet for her to tell me how she was conducting her review. I was concerned, as she made absolutely clear, and she said it was a proper thing for me to do, that we couldn't wait for her report to be completed and published, for us to do things to assess our policies to make sure we were absolutely tip-top, because I had seen the criticisms being levelled against us. So I think we did exactly the proper thing, and basically she said the same, which is to commission a review of all our policies, all our guidelines, including whistleblowing, and then get the you said GoodCorporation in a sort of, who are they? These are impressive people who, let me tell you, made 53 recommendations, 51 of which we've accepted, one we're still working on, and one we agreed, actually, we could find a better way of doing it. GoodCorporation are experts. These are not people who will not speak truth to us, because they have done. They absolutely have done. Now, that's one set of things, because I want to make sure, as soon as I came back here, as quickly as we could, that we could do as much as we can to ensure that the culture, which I think the staff here believe in, and I certainly do, that we'd learned from the past. I think Dame Janet raises a very interesting issue about the prevalence of freelancers right across broadcasting, and how we can make sure that they too feel that they can talk about issues they think should be raised. And our whistleblowing policies and all the other policies apply to anyone who's working at the BBC, freelance or not. Nonetheless, she says, as you've read, take 6 months, think about this, review your policies, and that's one area I'll be having a look at, because I don't care who people are. If they work for the BBC, I want to ensure that whatever they feel, if they feel they're being abused in any way, bullied, harassed, or sexually abused, I want them to have the confidence they must come forward. I have to say, I go back to it, today for me is an awful lot about the survivors. We owe that to them.
I'll just say a few words. Firstly, on the question about the change in the remit of Dame Janet Smith. If I go back to when Tony was brought in, as he said, in a period of crisis. He immediately set about changing things, changing the culture and changing the policies and the procedures. He came to the Trust saying that Dame Janet, for the reason she explained, was her report was going to be delayed, and that in the interest of making the BBC as good as it could possibly be in all of those policies and procedures, he wanted to change the remit and to bring in an expert who could do the audit and could report back to the BBC so that the BBC could start making the changes as soon as they possibly could. And when he came to us with that proposition, the Trust said, absolutely, we support you in doing that. And as Tony said, the good report came and said, yes, a lot of positive changes, but more needs to be done. We obviously worked alongside the executive team as these came through. They have been overseen to make sure that they have been implemented. And as Tony has told you, 51 have been fully implemented, one ongoing and the other one that a different way to deal with it. So I absolutely think it was the right thing to do because it allowed the BBC to know what the best looked like and to make those changes. In terms of Dame Janet's finding that staff are still frightened, you ask, is that concerning? Of course it's concerning. What we have to do, and this goes to the cultural point, and what Tony, who lead the organisation and lead this cultural change, has to make sure is that the environment that, as Dame Janet said, that people feel comfortable raising a claim in whatever way they choose to, whether it's through their line or through the complaints or through the whistleblowing, they are not only feel able to, but when those complaints come, they are treated with respect. And the corollary is the fact that people will have to be open, both in giving and in receiving bad news. So I think that, yes, it is concerning, and that is absolutely the heart of the cultural shift that needs to happen. But what I would say was that gives every more reason why this report is important, because it gives that impetus to show people what happens when people don't speak up, or when they do, they are ignored or pushed aside. And I hope, as I said in my statement, that from today nothing will be the same, because people will realise just how these sexual predators operate and are able to see that, and therefore be much more open to hearing complaints and investigating properly.
May I ask a quick
look,
supplementary
we need to move on because we've
Are you
had
pleased
lots.
that your predecessor
of
commissioned this
questions.
report?
Sorry, I can't hear.
Are you pleased that your predecessor commissioned the Smith Review?
Well, please is a funny verb to use about a report which is as horrific as this. I'll use that slightly quaint word, content. I mean, this is, as I made clear, this is what is described here is dreadful. It's a really dark day for the BBC, but we owe it to all those who gave witness to the reviews, and especially to those survivors of Savile and Hall, to do everything in our power to make sure it can't happen again. To that extent, absolutely worth it. And I also, by the way, I hope that in what we do and say going forward, that today is about the BBC, today is about getting the BBC in the place that we all believe it should be. But I also hope others will learn from us in the way that we handle this and the lessons for organisations right across the piece.
Okay, if we just go to the Mail and then to the Telegraph.
Hi there. You've made it very clear that Tony Blackburn parted company with the BBC because you had concerns over the way he engaged with the inquiry. Could you say very specifically whether you believe he lied to or deliberately misled the review? And second of all, can you tell us if he has received any money, whether as a settlement or in lieu of notice? Thank you.
I think Dame Janet made it absolutely clear how important the treatment of Mrs. McAlpine's complaint about her daughter was in understanding how the BBC handled complaints at the time. The paragraphs that are key, which I think are, if I remember, 9.181 and 9.56, shows that Tony Blackburn was interviewed on two occasions, once by Bill Cotton and once by Sir Brian Neal, QC. And when interviewed by Dame Janet, he denied he'd been interviewed on either occasion. Now, my view is that given the importance of this review and investigation, given the weight of responsibility of everyone to fully and frankly work with Dame Janet's review, I felt it was untenable for the BBC to continue its relationship because of that. And for that, we've parted our ways. In terms of contracts and so on, then I won't get drawn into that. That's a matter between the BBC and Mr. Blackburn.
Okay. Neil?
I'm going wholly on what Dame Janet in her report very carefully says. And her phrase, I think, is she has rejected his evidence. She draws attention in both those two paragraphs to a statement made by his solicitor. I think that's serious. Mr. Blackburn, Tony Blackburn, fell short of the standards of evidence that such an inquiry demanded, and that's my belief, and therefore we acted accordingly.
Neil?